Thanks for joining us for another edition of The Small Business Show with Cheyenne Malone, exclusively on ASBN.com.
Hi everyone, I'm Cheyenne Malone. Welcome to another edition of The Small Business Show. Joining us now, we have Paul Sarvadi. He's an author, chairman, and CEO at Insperity. Welcome, Paul. We also have Dr. Eli Jones. He's an author, independent director at Insperity, and professor at Texas A&M University. Welcome to you both. Glad to have you on, gentlemen.
Oh, thank you, Cheyenne. Glad to be here.
So we're here to talk about this recent book the two of you have co-authored, Making Differences Work. Let's start with you, Dr. Eli. Give us a brief overview of what this book is about.
Sure, absolutely. Paul and I engaged in this, I guess it was about 2, maybe 3 years ago in writing the book. And our observation was, when you think about what's going on in our society now, although our book is really focused on the workplace, what we're looking at is how do you fully engage your employees? How do you engage those workers? And so if you look at it from the perspective of, we know building commonality, focusing on equality, equal opportunities, focusing on cohesion is a way to create a sense of belonging. And if we look at the current research, we see that a sense of belonging in the organization can drive some significant outcomes. And for us, we actually thought about what are the things that companies, organizations really want to have with respect to employee engagement, where they're fully engaged to the extent that they give extra effort, discretionary effort beyond what's expected. That's one outcome that we focus on. We also look at this collaborative culture. How do you instill this kind of a culture where people are excited about collaborating with one another inside an organization? We're looking at team creativity or innovation. Innovation is important to every organization. And so we're looking at that as one of the 4 outcomes. And last of all, we're looking at this alignment. It's an alignment of values. How do we make sure that we have the same employees who really believe in the values of that organization? And when we do those 4 things, we have a collaborative organization that's focused on innovation, enjoying working with one another. They're unified despite a color of skin, despite any differences. It really is, how do we unify a workforce? And that really is the overview of our book. We started looking at DEI, and we said, look, let's look at DEI and how effective DEI programs are in these various organizations. And then we lead to the commonality, equality, cohesion, sense of belonging, and those 4 outcomes. That's a brief overview of the book. We're excited about it. We had some really great empirical findings.
I bet. Paul, what motivated you to even, put your 2 heads together and write a book like this?
There were 2 important events that really made me jump off and say, I'm writing this down. And the first one was, of course, what we all experienced was the George Floyd tragedy and murder that took place in front of all of our eyes, and the deep emotional impact that had on so many, including everyone in my own organization at Insperity. And out of that, even though I felt like our values-based, culture-driven, people-centric approach to building our company was putting us in a strong position relative to the original unifying goals of DEI, I still felt that it was important for me to have an outside firm come in and fully evaluate our company to make sure that we were on the right track. And so we went through that process, and they came in and uncovered every rock and really did a deep dive in the organization because we didn't have a DEI program because I've had this other approach to our culture. Now, when we ended the research and they came and delivered the results, by that time I was wondering, well, maybe, are we really far enough along down this road? Are we on the right track? And when they finalized their research and gave us the results, they benchmarked us against other firms, and we were well above the benchmarks. And so I asked the question, wait a minute. We haven't been doing many of the things you all have emphasized in a programmatic way relative to diversity, equity, and inclusion. why do you think we are so far above these benchmarks? And they looked at me and said, we don't know. And that's when I said, well, I think I know, but I've never written it down. And so I started down this path and then asked Dr. Jones, longtime friend of mine, as I had the concept and I had a case study of Insperity, but didn't really have this validated in a scientific or academic way. And Dr. Jones did such a fabulous job. He literally said, look, yeah, I'll write this with you, but I've got to measure to see if this is really going to work. He's so great at research, business-related research, and his findings just validated that we were on an incredible track, not only to achieve the original unifying goals of diversity, equity, and inclusion, but also those outcomes Dr. Jones was talking about that are central, in my mind, for any business leader who wants to take their company to the next level. That's a powerful combination.
How long have the two of you known each other?
20 years.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. It's flown by. 2004 is when we first met. I remember that.
And I ought to mention that when the tragedy took place that we all watched on TV with George Floyd's murder, shortly after that, when I saw the emotional reaction across our organization and tried to evaluate what was going on, my first phone call was to my good friend, Eli. And so we could have real discussions about, what's the right pathway forward.
I just wanted to jump in and add to what my friend brought up. If you look at the history of Insperity and you look at all of the awards this company has won, most recently it's Glassdoor. If you look at Glassdoor, I think we've been ranked in the top 100 for a couple of years in a row. If you look at the stock value, you look at the company overall and its performance, and you step back and say, what is really driving that level of performance, that innovation that they really, really delve into a lot in terms of how do we continue to improve and innovate in this professional employer organization that is called Insperity. And so when you look at that, it was really interesting to go in thinking about how Paul has really built this culture that he described, and to go in and say, okay, if that's true, let's go in and get your employees' perspectives on the company relative to DEI, CEC, belonging, and those 4 outcomes. And so what it did, and it was a fun project, we had a really good response rate. And what we did was we empirically tested, we measured every concept that we mentioned in the book, we measured those things. And then we ran certain models, and those models then became a little predictive. So once you really have this kind of a culture, which is the main part of the book, it's a cultural perspective more than anything. It's beyond a program that you typically see in the DEI space. We might do unconscious biases as a program in our company, and that's fine. But how do you build a culture based on being people-centric? And once you build that kind of a culture, the rest of it is going to fall into place if you're people-centric. And it makes sense for Insperity to lead the way here, because that's what Insperity does. Insperity works with small to mid-sized business owners, and Insperity is the HR solution for those small to mid-sized businesses. So this whole idea of being people-centric really cascades throughout the organization and hopefully in the business community nationally. There are lots of companies who really need to understand how do you build this kind of a culture, right? And that's what this is all about. We're excited about it.
And Paul, kind of walk me through some of the strategies from the book, because you mentioned George Floyd, right? And that was definitely a life-changing moment for so many people. And I feel like so many corporations, organizations, people in general had a different outlook, or if they didn't, after that event, they tried to reach out and learn more. Do you feel like a lot of that was in the beginning, right? Where companies said, I've got a new initiative, or we're going to implement this and do that. Do you feel like that's kind of worn off since that story has been in the past now? And if so, how do companies stay with it? How do they stay engaged and continue to work through these challenges?
Yeah, that's an important and good question. And to really understand that, we have to look at the backdrop of what has happened in the diversity, equity, and inclusion work in the workplace. And the reality is that the DEI movement started with original unifying objectives that were really important and necessary. But shortly after that, that turned into more of a check the box process or program internally because it was more focused on managing liabilities in a business than it was at changing the outcomes. Now, then it became more of an energy drain as there was more effort to be just repetitive about meeting this liability management. Now, at some point, people got frustrated in that world and started to push other efforts that really caused more division than it caused unification. And as you can see, even in more recent history, has even gotten potentially toxic, maybe from some people really getting off track. So we believe that it's very important to not have a program, but really weave into the fabric of the company these values that are important about the worth of each person and growing in care and concern for each person through a focus not just on diversity, equity, and inclusion, but the higher goals of commonality, equality, and cohesion. So we call it two sides of a coin. Diversity is critical, not only diversity of background, but also a diversity of how people think is very important. But just having a variety of people around the table isn't going far enough. The other side of the coin is getting to know the commonality amongst people so that they have a care and concern about each other and can accomplish great things together. So it's two sides of a coin. Same thing with equity and equality and inclusion and cohesion. You know, you can be included, but not appreciated. And cohesion is about getting to the point where you are committed to each other and stick together and can do great things like these 4 outcomes that Dr. Jones described.
And Dr. Jones, you know, isn't it though so easy to stay within your comfort zone, right? People who are like-minded or like you or look like you. Obviously, when you're reaching across and you are going to the unknown, let's say, I think people, you know, then become insecure, right? And they're uneasy and uncomfortable, and it's harder for them to do so. So that's why they don't do it. How do you make that connection of such a disconnection?
Sure. Yeah, so when we think about ethnic diversity, you know, typically we're looking at perhaps the color of skin and so on, and that's important. But remember, the title of this book is Making Differences Work. And one of the ideas that we propose in the book is, you know, even within a certain race, you're going to have differences, right?
Sure.
We're all different in certain ways, right? And so the value to a business or any kind of an organization of getting people who may look different than us, but to get them completely involved, the value is that now you have a unified workforce. And we're very careful. We're saying, hey, this is in the workplace. What can an organization do to create that kind of environment, that kind of culture where everyone feels that they belong, right? Despite any perceived differences. And so you can see it in Insperity. You can actually see the teams working together and innovating. So I do believe, again, it goes back to the kind of culture that you instill where people feel safe, right? Mm-hmm. We want the whole environment to feel safe. It's okay to speak your mind. That's part of the inclusion part. It's okay to share your thoughts. And one of the things that we know in the research is when you're able to accomplish that goal, when you have that safe place throughout the organization where people can come and express their thoughts, all right? What you find is you have different perspectives brought to the table when you're making a decision. And it's been validated that the more you have that, the better the ideas you have. Mm-hmm. So think of a business problem that we're trying to solve. If I come at it from my perspective, it could be my cultural background. It could be, you know, where I was geographically, but I have a different perspective on that one problem that we're trying to solve. The more we have people around the table with those differences and those people feel comfortable expressing their ideas, we come up with better ideas. Mm-hmm. The company comes out with better ideas. And that's our goal here. That's what we're saying in making differences work. We may have perceived differences, but what we find is we find more commonality, right? So Paul and I, as an example, we look different, right? We have different backgrounds. He is a wonderful CEO, a fantastic leader. I've led business schools. I'm on the academic side, but you'd be amazed at how much he and I have in common. I mean, right back to we both started at a very early age with a family, and we've worked through some obstacles in our lives. And Paul has built an enterprise based on helping other businesses accomplish the same goals that Insperity has.
That's awesome. And 20 years of friendship at that. So it's nice that you can have a good time and then get to business at the same time. Before I say goodbye, Paul, what do you want at the end of the day your readers to walk away with when they read this book?
Yes, I realize that many business owners and leaders are struggling with how do we address the emotional issues of our workforce and move forward in bringing people together and creating the right culture. And this new approach, commonality and quality and cohesion, will give you a positive, high energy approach to not only accomplish the goals of diversity, equity, and inclusion, those original unifying goals, but also really taking your business to the next level by building a sense of belonging, a deep sense of belonging in your organization. So here's a new path forward that I believe will really help business leaders and ultimately the employees and families inside each organization.
Well said. Paul Sarvadi and Dr. Eli Jones, thanks so much for joining us, gentlemen, and thank all of you for watching the Small Business Show exclusively right here on ASBN.com and now streaming on Roku, Fire TV, and Apple TV.
Thanks for joining us for another edition of The Small Business Show with Cheyenne Malone, exclusively on ASBN.com.